Good morning. Marvellous to be back in New York. I'd like to tell you today about a breakthrough moment that I had alone on a rowboat somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And I hope that you'll take some value away from it, even if rowing across oceans is not your thing. I think it's a great metaphor for many of the challenges that we face as activists, as entrepreneurs, as mayoral candidates, or maybe even just in our family relationships. Any one of us who has faced an enormous challenge, I think, will relate to this story. The Atlantic was my first ocean, and as with so many things, the first time you try them, it's really, really hard. This wasn't helped by the fact I'd picked the absolute worst year to row the Atlantic. 2005 was the year of Hurricane Katrina, more storms than any previous year in the North Atlantic. By the time I reached halfway across the ocean, all 4 of my oars had broken. My camping stove had broken. I don't know if you've ever tried cold freeze-dried meals, but I wouldn't highly recommend them. My stereo had broken. So by this point, for the last 2 months, I'd had nothing but my own thoughts to entertain me. And even though, obviously, I'm a highly entertaining person, even I was pretty sick of myself by this point. And on this one particular day, I just hit a real low point. The winds were pushing me backwards, further away from my destination of Antigua, and it really felt like I was just never going to reach dry land. I could hardly even remember what it looked like. I'd been at sea for 60 or 70 days by now, and I was just at my absolute limit of frustration, of pain, discomfort, boredom. I was just absolutely at the end of my tether. I felt so trapped, literally on this 23-foot rowboat, but also psychologically trapped in this enormous challenge that I had taken on. And I was on the satellite phone to my mother, and it was one of only 2 times on that ocean when I broke down and cried. And to my dying day, I will be so grateful to my mother, because she could so easily have said, "Well, Rosalind, I could have told you this was a terribly bad idea." And it's so humbling to witness a mother's love. Instead, she just, with so much love and sympathy in her voice, she said, "Rosalind, do you want to quit?" And it might sound like a really negative question. She could tell that I'd had enough. And yet somehow, with that question, she triggered off this whole line of thoughts that helped me to reconnect with what I was doing out there, why I was doing this ridiculous thing. I'd had this environmental epiphany. I was reading some of the same stuff that Robin's been reading, and I was deeply alarmed about the way that the world was going. And so I'd chosen to use ocean rowing as my platform to get the message across to people that we need to take better care of this earth, or else it's not going to go so well for the humans on it. I was also on a personal quest to prove what I was capable of when I'd taken myself so far away from the nearest help. And maybe most importantly, I was desperate not to go back to the office cubicle. I'd spent the first 11 years of my adult life working as a management consultant. And over those years, there was a growing sense that I was doing a job I didn't like to buy stuff I didn't need. And what really brought this home to me was one day when I came home from the office and decided to write 2 alternative versions of my own obituary. The one that I wanted and the one that I was heading for if I carried on as I was. And I looked at these 2 dramatically different versions and realized that I was going pretty much 180 degrees in the wrong direction if I wanted to end up with the kind of life that I could be proud of. And so over the ensuing years, I'd let go of all those trappings of my old life and reinvented myself as an adventurer. And so at that moment, when my mother said, "Do you want to give up?" half of me was saying, "Yes, I want to give up. Just get me off this boat. I'm sick of it." But the other half of me knew that I would never forgive myself if I gave up now. And I guess I was helped by the fact that logistically it's extremely difficult to quit in the middle of the ocean. Or let's just say there'd be a really long cooling off period to change my mind before a ship showed up to take me to dry land. And looking back now, I am so glad that I persevered through that moment of weakness. When I finally arrived in Antigua, after a total of 103 days at sea, for the last 24 of which my satellite phone had broken and I had no communications at all, that sense of achievement when I stepped onto dry land was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. And I really learned that the size of the sense of achievement is directly proportionate to the amount of struggle and hardship and effort and suffering that's gone into getting you there. It was like, I guess, finishing a marathon and winning an Oscar and getting out of jail all rolled into one. I've only done one of those three things, and I hope you know which one it is. And so I'd like to say to you, if you're facing a big challenge right now, and there are days when you feel like the wind is blowing you backwards and you wonder how you can carry on and why did this ever seem like a good idea in the first place, hold true to the vision. You had a vision when you set out at the start of that challenge about why you wanted to do it and why it was going to be worth it and what you were going to bring to the world at the end of it. So keep the faith. Hold that vision in your mind. Also, don't think about all the things that could go wrong in the future between where you are now and where you want to be. Just hold the vision and then think, what can I do today to bring myself a little bit closer to the goal? At the start of my row, I looked at the whole 3,000 miles that lay ahead of me and became completely overwhelmed. And I had to learn to just take it one day or one rowing shift or sometimes just the next 100 oar strokes. And finally, I did get there. The thing that the Atlantic really did for me was that it expanded my comfort zone. This is what I'd wanted to get out of it personally. And I had a little mini epiphany on the way across when I was having such an uncomfortable time. And this word, uncomfortable, uncomfort, just kept going round and round in my head. And then I remembered that I'd been quite happily whittering on to anybody who would listen about how I wanted to get outside of my comfort zone while conveniently forgetting that getting outside your comfort zone by definition is going to be uncomfortable. And so when I had that mini epiphany, I realized that the discomfort meant I was actually succeeding in my mission. I wasn't failing. And when you do reach those bad days, just remember that in order to have a breakthrough, first of all, you need to be stuck. And those periods of stuckness are actually our best friends. And it might feel like there's a real tension in that, but it's a creative tension. And then the winds of life will change, and eventually you will break through. And you'll look back at that point that seemed like this solid wall that you just couldn't get past. And you'll realize that it was just a mirage. So whatever your personal challenges are, I hope that you enjoyed my little story. I did, after having just about survived the Atlantic experience, learn so much from that experience. I went on to row another 8,000 miles across the Pacific and another 5,000 across the Indian Ocean. Once you've done one really hard challenge and survived it, it does make the later ones an awful lot easier. Thank you very much.